you for joining us. Thanks very much indeed to our 4 panelists that are going to join us. I'm very happy to be here today. ORCID had its last peer review week event in 2019. So we've had about 5 years to think about what's going on, and I'm really glad to be hosting an event to think about this integral part of the scholarly communications process. I'd like to first introduce our panelists, and then, if it's all right, I'm going to just introduce how peer review works in ORCID. When I started at ORCID, I was a bit confused about this because peer review is usually blind and ORCID is open. So I thought, I don't know how this is going to work, but I'll just share a wee bit about that. And that's like a 5-minute slide deck. And then we'll turn it over to our panel to talk about a few topics going on these days. So without further ado, we have Jocelyn Dawson. Jocelyn is the Director of Journals at the University of Pennsylvania Press. We have Kathleen Fitzpatrick, and she is the Interim Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies at Michigan State University. We have Elena Kim, who is a professor of anthropology at University of California, Irvine. And we have Charles Watkinson, who is Associate Librarian at University of Michigan. He's also the head of the University of Michigan Press, and I believe the current president of the Association of University Presses. Yeah,
past president, but
past.
Recently passed.
No way, really? Oh, when did that happen?
It turns over. It's just 1 year they allowed me to be in there. So turned over in June.
Very good. Okay, well, we're still delighted to have you, and thanks very much. All right, well, we'll get back to these lovely folks in a bit, and I'm just going to introduce a teeny bit about ORCID and peer review. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to do the awkward pause where I share my screen, just starting now. Here we are. All right, folks. There we are. Located. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Looks good.
All right. Well, this year's theme is innovation and technology. We were having a chat about this last week. We're not quite sure we're really the best folks to speak about innovation and technology, but oh well, we'll see what happens during the discussion. I did notice that the Scholarly Kitchen put out an interesting blog addressing this today, so I think that's a good resource that we can share. So, as I said, when I joined ORCID 6 years ago, I had no idea how peer review would be represented in ORCID. So I'm just going to share a teeny bit about how it works and how it relates to, I would say, research integrity and transparency. So I'm going to, got a lot of Zoom stuff. There we are. All right. If you're a reviewer or a scholar, you kind of know that this is something that folks may ask you, and it's something that you may do, but you're not compensated for it. And really, there's no clear way of tracking who offers their time, their resources, their expertise to do review of published work. So you may put it on your CV. There's a lot of academic profile systems that are in use, but to be honest, I could just add my background was in Chinese literature and history as a long time ago, I could put a lot of things there that I did not do as a reviewer, and that's kind of self-asserted. So one good thing about ORCID is that you may be familiar with ORCID as a place where you can put your employment and your publications, but the fact that ORCID is kind of a research infrastructure hub that interacts with other systems, and that's really all it does. The peer review in an ORCID record has to come from an external system with the reviewer's permission, and that's the only way it can be in there. So if you're curious about your vetting reviewers and things like that, ORCID is a good place to look. Mind you, a lot of the systems that interact with ORCID are really big ones, so you'll probably miss some folks that do a lot of things on smaller systems. And how exactly does this work? So the reviewer, when they're essentially they use their ORCID as a sign-in, as a password to whatever system. So just as some of you may have submitted a manuscript as an author, the reviewer would do the same thing. They would kind of sign in with their ORCID, and then once the journal or publisher was satisfied, they might submit that to your work. And the main thing is the details of what work or book chapter journal that you've reviewed does not appear in your ORCID record. It just says, I've been a reviewer for such and such. So here's an example of one of our past board members, and she was a reviewer for PLOS. And so here's what that looks like. It's got the ISSN and the journal there, PLOS Biology. One very important thing, next time you look at your ORCID record, every employment and peer review and work will have a source there. So if you added it yourself, that will have your name there. If a publishing system or another system added it for you, say a university, say like Michigan State, it will have that name next to the source. So this is how you can distinguish things that are added from external systems with your permission. I'm just adding a few more examples. I work with our New Zealand consortium, and they, one of the forms of review that they do is for grants. So this is a small grant given by Royal Society Te Aparangi, and this person was a reviewer for that award, and so they've taken it upon themselves to add that to the reviewer's record. So it's not quite, a publication review, but an award review. Sorry. Yeah. I'm just putting this in here. Nobody needs to memorize this, but these are the numbers of who adds review to ORCID. As you can see, it's mostly the big folks, but there's quite a lot. 7% of ORCID records have a peer review in them. As this audience probably doesn't interact with the big folks all that much. I just put this in here. Open journal systems. I know we have a question from an attendee about open journal systems and how they do peer review. So they're a free open source interface, and a lot of journals, particularly in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, utilize that interface to do their stuff. IGI Global, this is who I did my peer review with. They do a lot of monographs and chapters. So just to let you know who has a system that can add things to ORCID. This is my contact. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And now I'm quite excited. Now we get to talk to the folks who are here. So let us get started if you're ready. So Jocelyn, I wonder if you could talk, so folks, for your benefit, we talked a teeny bit about what we should talk about on this session. And I thought I'd ask you about ethical peer review and the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications. Could you tell us a teeny bit about that? I'm not terribly familiar.
Sure. Yeah, so this past May, C4DISC and the Society for Scholarly Publishing Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Committee published a guide to kind of inclusive peer review and editorial role selection. And this is a really wonderful toolkit. I think Kimberly has a link here in the link section of the resources. So yeah, so it's a toolkit for editors and publishers. And they talk about ways to expand the pool of peer reviewers. So I think we hear a lot as publishers about the crisis in peer review. You know, people are having to go, 3, 4, 5 reviewers deep before they can get someone to commit to reviewing. So this toolkit has a lot of practical tips for expanding that pool of experienced reviewers. The toolkit makes the point that peer review is a skill that must be learned. So as we think about expanding our pool to folks that might have traditionally been excluded from editorial boards or people who are new to the profession, thinking about how to train and mentor those reviewers. They talk about workshops, about pairing people up for co-review, potentially adding early career researchers to your board, but sort of helping the folks that are new to your reviewer pool become those go-to people that you can reach out to when you need a reviewer. And there was also a really great list of tools to help familiarize people with what to do as a peer reviewer. So I think I'll put that here in the chat, or I will chat it to Kimberly and see if she can put it in. But yeah, so several of the large publishers and I think a couple other organizations have guides to sort of give people that kind of foundation and what it takes to present a good peer review.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it seems like maybe reviewing is kind of like teaching, perhaps. I've heard a lot of discussion about like, oh, okay, you might be a good researcher, but you might not be a very good teacher. I don't know. What do you guys think? Have you?
I think that one of the things that we hope that our editors and our editorial board members who are maybe reviewing the peer reviewers' feedback, what they do is make sure that people are being teachers, that they're being helpful, that they're being kind, that they're helping the work become stronger, and they're not just kind of cutting it down. We want it to be sort of a positive experience. We want, it's all about making sure that the piece is a good fit for the journal, not as much about gatekeeping. Yeah, Charles, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Yes, I think that's a really important concept about what is peer review really for. I mean, really helping people who are new to reviewing think of it as a coaching exercise, as essentially about building up the scholar's work rather than pulling it down, pulling it apart, sort of foregrounding themselves as a peer reviewer rather than being, to quote one of our other panelists, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, a generous thinker, somebody who wants to raise others up. I think you are 100% right that is not necessarily intuitive when you're first presented with a manuscript that you're asked to peer review. It can easily be a very forensic, you go in there and you tear it apart. But really helping peer reviewers realize the impact of what they're doing, I think is really important, and that coaching, supporting. It's a very good point. I know that Kathleen, I referenced her. I know that she thinks a lot about what that role is.
I do. I have a thing or two to say about this. So thank you for having me here today. I'm really, excited about this conversation. I come to this question about peer review from a couple of different perspectives. I have been writing about peer review for a very long time. My book, Planned Obsolescence, several books back, has a big chapter on opening up peer review and thinking about what might happen if we were to think about peer review in more open terms. But I've also been working with a team here at Michigan State. It's a team called Mesh Research that has been working on a tool called Pilcrow for a while. There's a link in, again, the links section of the resources here that you can find out more about this tool. It's intended to support peer review in a way that we refer to as collaborative community review. And that mode of review, as we understand it, it's a fairly opinionated tool in the way that it's set up in two regards. One is the conversation that Jocelyn and Charles have been having here, that peer review is best conducted in a fashion that's really more formative, right? Aimed at improving the work and making it the best possible work that it can be. As opposed to summative, which is the kind of review that happens when you've either got a gatekeeping mechanism or you're going to get a grade at the end of the semester or something like that, right? This is really feedback that's intended to support the work. But the other way in which Pilcrow is opinionated is that we genuinely believe that that review happens best when there's a trusting relationship built between reviewers and authors. And that may require breaking down some of the veil of anonymity between reviewers and authors to allow for genuine conversation around the work to take place. So Pilcrow is a tool that allows work to be posted by an editor of a publication that then seeks out the reviewers to do the work on the article in the tool, to leave comments that then can be responded to by the author, who can ask for more information as they do the work of reviewing the text, of revising the text for its final publication. And the process is not fully open, right? This is not one of those open peer review processes that I have experimented with in which the world is invited to come and contribute to this review process. This is a more selective process, such as many journals and presses use. It just puts everybody into a community-oriented environment in which a conversation about the work can unfold. So there you have the link there to find out more about Pilcrow. There's also, if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, you'll find another link that will lead you to a test environment in which you are welcome to create an account and actually play with the tool and see how it works. One of the goals for this tool is really for publications to think explicitly about the values that they bring to the publication, and to have those values be a core part of what reviewers are meant to be addressing in the work. And so it becomes a very values-oriented environment for this work to be done. So I will leave it there.
That's interesting. So I have to admit, I don't think I've seen a community peer review work, but I'm curious, is there attribution to say the reviewer? Because it sounds like as the word is collaborative, right? So the author,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's kind of something beyond the last bit beyond the references being like, oh, thank you, Kathleen, for reviewing my work, something like
Absolutely. Absolutely. We in an ideal world would like to see that kind of attribution take place. I've done several different open peer review experiments with my own work, with my books, which I have published the manuscript of online and have gotten a lot of feedback. And I have cited that feedback because I feel like it's really important for me to be able to gesture toward the folks who actually gave me the good idea to fix the thing that was broken in the text. I think we do get, that sort of generic thank you to the reviewers of this piece who helped me make it better. But because of anonymity in the process, we don't always know who those reviewers are. And with something like Pilcrow, we have the opportunity for those reviewers to be explicitly credited with their contributions to the development of the piece.
Elena, I know you've had experience, like you were past president of a small association and you've interacted quite a bit with big publishers. Do you think that's something they might be willing to explore, or what's your view on how this is being digested?
Yes, sorry. I actually can't speak to that directly. I don't actually know. Relevant to this conversation, I can just say, as a reviewer, I have done the sort of co-reviewing with my own graduate students. And it was actually proposed to me by an editor for one of the anthropology journals. And it was just a fantastic experience when I did it the first time. So the next time I was asked to review something for a feminist studies journal, I asked the editors if I could do that, and they were open to it. So I feel like, it's that first opportunity to bring my graduate student into the process was, a really kind of eye-opening one. And certainly what I learned is that you do need to, I mean, it's, peer review doesn't come naturally, right? And so the things we were just talking about, graduate students are trained to break things down, to deconstruct, to be very, very critical, and that becomes the performative mode that is rewarded in classrooms. But when it comes to peer review, it can really just be, in terms of tone, in terms of even in terms of intellectual discourse, just too much. It's not about not being generous. It's just kind of like not the right mode by which I think, anyone would want to be involved in the process. So it was a learning experience for me to have to mentor and train someone to figure out the right tone, like the tone that they would want to receive if they were the author being peer reviewed, So I really appreciate this conversation because I think it helps to open up some of the very sort of, micro level processes by which we produce knowledge. And I think some of the ways in which we don't often think about how we're conveying certain cultures of expertise to our graduate students. So, peer review is probably the thing that they're least familiar with by the time they get to be sort of later on in their career, but it's the thing that they worry about the most, right, is publishing before they get their PhD so they can be well positioned on the job market, et cetera. So I'm a huge proponent of this, and moving forward, this is all I want to do is co-review with my graduate students because it's very generative, and I do think that this is the way to make some of the changes that Kathleen is talking about and has written about, is to really kind of put it into practice. And I think Pilcrow could be a really great way to explore those possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, is there an adjustment, do you feel like? I mean, because I don't know, sometimes I think it's just kind of links a bit to giving feedback to anyone, right? Review and things. And so if I know, say not necessarily peer review, but professional feedback, I know I've benefited sometimes with sharing that with someone else and then them adding a layer that I haven't quite thought of, and things like that. Do you think that's, I mean, yeah, that's got to be helpful, but it's also got to be a bit of an adjustment, right, for folks.
Yeah, and I guess I would just say quickly that the learning goes both ways, just because as the more senior person, you have to figure out how best to articulate the thing that you just kind of do, because no one oversees your peer review, really. You never get feedback on your own peer review until you see the article come out. So having to explain, I mean, this is just basic, this is why you learn best when you have to teach something, right? So, because you have to make explicit why you think this is better than kind of, going for the jugular, in the first paragraph, and then the collaboration really starts. You start to see the layering of, the conversation between yourself and the co-reviewer, and that's really, really rewarding.
I'm curious, what do you think could make the reviewer's work more rewarded from, say, the publishers or anything? I'm sorry, I know this, I'm kind of throwing in something we didn't quite talk about in our previous thing, but I'm just curious because I do think it's a very valuable exercise that people do, and they share their insight, and hopefully they do it well, as Elena said. But what do you think? Is there anything that would make reviewers feel more like that their work was being recognized, I suppose, beyond the author, being like, yes, I've got something in Nature that's got, on CNN and lots of citations and things like that.
One thing that we've heard is that reviewers want to know what the outcome of the piece was, how was their feedback used? And then also receiving a thank you. We have a journal that once a year sends a thank you note to everyone who reviewed for them. There's small incentives. As a publisher, we give a coupon for books to our journal peer reviewers. And of course, the other incentive is to be able to list this as service to the profession for professors who are going up for promotion or for tenure. But I think from a practical standpoint, that kind of thank you and knowing that your work was valuable is probably the most attainable for all of us.
I would agree with that. And I think that having the fact of having done a good peer review become part of your record as a scholar, so that it's just as visible as the work that you've published, is something that we have to navigate. I mean, sometimes you wouldn't necessarily want to publish the peer review because the author of the piece that you're reviewing may not want that out there for the entire world to see. But at other times, the review can take a shape that is of itself a kind of essay that is useful to have out in circulation. So one of the options that we do have within Pilcrow is the ability to export a final note on the document that can be then deposited somewhere as evidence of the work that you've done. And I think having the potential then to connect that into ORCID so that it becomes part of your record as a scholar could be really profound as a way of indicating that review is work and that it should count as part of your scholarly record.
Yeah, would that, Kathleen, I'm curious, would that be like in a data repository, like kind of similar to, having your data available?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're thinking about, so the team that I am talking about, Mesh Research here at MSU, that built Pilcrow, the other major project that we work on is Knowledge Commons, which of course has a repository that is also connected into ORCID. And so we could imagine building out the possibility to export the work that's been done in Pilcrow directly into the Commons repository that would then become available and have its own DOI and so forth.
Yeah, a DOI is all you would need. Of course, anything with a DOI goes straight into ORCID. So whether it's data or review work or, even a video like this, something like that. Yeah, I was thinking too of the, I don't know if you all are familiar, but NISO has a few roles for authors. So people do different things in publications. They do the, the groundwork, maybe the actual writing. They might do, lab work, say in the STEM bits. And so they have several specific roles of people's contributions to each publication, which we do make available in ORCID. So I was thinking of that when you were speaking about the collaborative aspect. But
and
Charles,
I was noticing, Kimberly, put the link to credit roles in just coming up here. I think those are really interesting. But the only thing I was thinking, Brian, is that, I mean, I think this theme of innovation and peer review and technology and peer review, and we have the Publons system, and we have reviewer credits, and these efforts to handle anonymized review and how to sort of give credit to people who've done an anonymous review, which is a bit different from the sort of work that Pilcrow is doing. But one thing that really comes through to me again and again is, as the amount of scholarship to be reviewed has scaled, there has been a disintermediation between the person whose work is being reviewed and the reviewer. And it's that relationship is often intermediated through very, very sterile systems. And I think one of the things we're seeing is a certain amount of pushback against the sterility of what is essentially a very human interaction. And it's really interesting what Jocelyn was saying about the credit, and and Elena was saying about the feeling, the feeling that you've actually made a difference. And how do we reinsert that humanity into the peer review interaction? And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing in the responses. I really love the Pilcrow idea of really sort of making scalable, making replicable, making that kind of credit and the ability to see what your review has done kind of embedded in the technology. It's very, very exciting.
yeah, I'm almost, wow. Immediately what came to mind, I mean, it's kind of the opposite of what you're saying, but I was thinking of some kind of metrics for a reviewer, but then people hate metrics, don't they? I mean, but I don't know, humane metrics might be a nice thing. I don't know if we could ever come up with it, if we could ever devise it. Yeah.
Can I just say, I noticed in the chat someone mentioned that, peer review could be included in like promotion evaluations and stuff. And I would actually push back against that. I think that adds another layer of, I mean, there's credit, but then this is just me speaking as someone who just went through this process recently. It seems to like insert another layer of inhumanity, as it were, because it's another metric that's kind of being merged with another set of metrics. And then whereas I think the part of the peer review that can be super humanized is the relationship building. And anonymization is part of the hurdle, and then how open to make it, et cetera. And then of course scholars are worried about other people stealing their ideas, and so there's going to be friction and things to work out in the process. But the just generalizing from what I had said earlier about what was rewarding was deepening my conversations with my graduate student and having some assurance that going forward, she knew how to frame and articulate what she thought peer review was and what it was good for and how it could be constructive and not destructive, as it were. So those things kind of are part of the value proposition, as if you want to put it that way, that I would want to protect from some of the other value propositions that we're increasingly being enrolled in, and that are, to my mind, part of the sort of inhumanity of some of the scholarly systems that we have to interface with.
Yeah.
Right. Brian, I'm sorry, I don't want to
ahead,
push
yeah.
the push, but it was really interesting in the Q&A to see this question about what are your thoughts on compensating peer reviewers? And I know that this has come up recently in something that you had asked me to mention. I think that this in the US, this antitrust lawsuit being brought against some of the very large commercial publishers by a researcher who is suggesting that there's been collusion around various practices to enforce various practices in publishing. And you'd mentioned a scholarly Kitchen article about this. It's really interesting. So one of the complaints of this researcher is that the publisher defendants agreed not to not compensate scholars for their labor, in particular not to pay for their peer review services, the unpaid peer review rule. In other words, the publisher defendants agreed to fix the price of peer review services at zero. So this is really interesting to see that particular topic of compensation for peer review coming up again. And I think it's a complicated one because on the one hand, it makes the peer review process very transactional, it feels. And also the question of what would be reasonable compensation is very hard to get at. I think their book publishers will generally have what they would term an honorarium as a gesture to a book reviewer, a manuscript reviewer, but with the recognition that that in no way compensates for the actual time taken by the researcher. So it's the question of compensation is really interesting because it does move this into a transactional space, and it feels like it's a manifestation of this feeling of alienation that reviewers have. It's like, if I'm not getting any credit, if I'm not getting, but also more importantly, if I'm not getting the human reward, if I'm not getting the feeling of being part of a community and building on a community, if you're treating me in a transactional way, publisher, then at least give me some money for it. But it's not, it feels like a symptom of a larger problem, that conversation, rather than necessarily the problem in itself. Kathleen, I noticed you unmuted there.
Yeah, I just want to say I really like that formulation, and that the problem is at root that transactional nature of the relationship between author and publisher, between publisher and reviewer, between publisher and field, that seems to create so much difficulty. I would also say in the case of many of the publishers, and particularly the ones named in this lawsuit, it's not just a transactional relationship, it's actually an extractive one. And that is really super problematic for a lot of folks. So one of the things, I mean, one of the reasons why Pilcrow is described as a collaborative community review space is very much trying to return publishing to community and to thinking about what it is when authors and editors and reviewers are all in the same enterprise together and are all working to make the work as good as it can be and to share that work with the world. So that's one of the things that I hope we might return to, rather than making the processes of publishing even more transactional, to instead think about what would it be to be in community around the publishing process.
And maybe I'll just add, in a previous conversation that the panelists had, I talked about a journal on the board of which I serve, and it's published by one of the large corporate for-profit entities. And they were verbally supportive of the journal, trying to increase its access to authors in the Global South, which in the conversation among the board members had to do with developmental editing. Right, so ensuring that even before the article got to the peer review process, it was in good shape to be considered for a revise and resubmit or what have you. So I bring this up for two reasons. One is to think about peer review kind of in a more like in a sort of more as just part of a much longer process, which can include developmental editing, which can include reaching out to a wider set of authors, kind of what Jocelyn was talking about earlier. And I think for in that conversation, verbally, the representative of the for-profit corporation who will not be named was supportive. And so, as someone who's very much invested in open access, I had to say then, well, will you provide money for us to do this? Like if we have a workshop or if we actually spend time doing the work of developmental editing. So I think that, these are kind of, again, like points of friction around if we want to really increase accessibility in all of the different stages of the publication process within the for-profit model. Yes, it's not really about compensation so much as, within the frame of that they think, it's the product, right? But in our terms, it's time and labor. So, who's going to support the extra space and time that's necessary to achieve the goals that we have, which is to, increase the number of people who can participate. So, I think those are some of the things that are, for me, very important for expanding the conversation. So peer review, yes, is very important, but all of these other aspects of widening the umbrella have a lot to kind of, have to be put in place for peer review to operate in the ways that we are talking about right now.
And to build on what Elena's saying, I think that open access is really key to sort of a truly equitable peer review landscape. So, I think we hear from some of our journals that the developmental editing, that the lift is so much greater if you're working with scholars who haven't had access to your journal on a regular basis, or maybe they're working from a journal issue that hasn't kept up with current arguments and an issue from 10 years prior. So I think that the more we are able to encourage open access and make the global research landscape more equitable, the better our peer review is going to be, and the more expansive our peer reviewer pools will be as well.
Yeah, if I could add, one thing I've noticed since not being affiliated with a university and working at ORCID is I fall into that category. I constantly fear about I don't have access to the most current research because of that. But also to add to what Elena was saying, expanding, the reviewer or expanding the scope. Charles, you'd mentioned a bit of an international perspective might be welcome. So I'm just going to add somebody that I work with in Denmark is quite active in research evaluation. So Americans might not realize that quite a few countries in the world have very, systematic research evaluation things going on every, few years to kind of evaluate researchers, I don't know, value. I really don't know what they're, I mean, I organized one of these at my university in Hong Kong in the past, but in any case, they try to kind of, for all of us, they would say okay, Brian, Jocelyn, Elena, Kathleen, Charles, this is what your research is, and they would, as I mentioned, they would come up with a metric there. And so this group in Europe is trying to come up with something that's not based on H-index and not based on journal impact and things like that. And I almost feel like review kind of falls into this because essentially you're doing the same thing but on a different sort of scale. Yeah. I don't know, but again, I don't like metrics. I don't like numbers, and I don't know. I hope we can all figure out who does good work based on what we do. Kimberly. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say, in that vein, on the I don't like metrics tip. Oh, whoops, wrong link. Please excuse that one. Sorry. Copied the
speaking
wrong
for myself with
URL.
the metrics not working too, by the way. I
Been
hope
there, of course. But my friends at Humetrics HSS have been working on humane metrics for quite some time, and it's worth poking at their work if you haven't seen it. It's really attempting to get at values-based assessment of the kinds of work that we do as scholars in the ways that we lead our scholarly lives.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's great.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you to all our panelists for such a great conversation thus far. We do have a handful of questions in the Q&A and about 13 minutes left for more audience questions. So I'm going to give the panelists a second to check out and indicate if they want to answer any. But I saw a question that came from one of our registrants at the beginning that I think it'd be great to hear your guys' perspective on this. Essentially, what this person is asking is, I'm an early career researcher willing to dedicate time to peer review, but how can I help journals find me? And how can, as an early career researcher, how do I get involved with peer review? Any takers?
Elena, what do you think? Is it ask your advisor or something like that, or what do you think?
Yes, ask your advisor. I mean, I imagine every field is somewhat different, but you know, meeting the editors at conferences might be a good idea as well. I feel like I saw something in one of the chats or Q&As about whether or not journals will only publish you if you have reviewed for them or vice versa or something like that. I don't think that's the case, but again, depending on the field, like in terms of cultural anthropology, it ends up being kind of a small world. And once you find your lane in terms of your theoretical or topical expertise, you know, it's like any kind of networking. It builds as you move through the different stages of your career. So I would say, yeah, you know, figure out how to make yourself know. I mean, I know the young ones today all have a personal website, which I do not, but you know, that's another way to do it. Yeah, it's just it's part of the networking of academia, I'd say.
Thanks.
Thanks, Elena. All right. Our next question, Charles, did you want to add something?
Well, only to just reinforce the idea of building and owning your profile as a scholar. I think this is something that Knowledge Commons facilitates particularly well. ORCID facilitates brilliantly as well, because to be honest, quite a lot of as a publisher, quite a lot of the work we're doing is trying to find reviewers for very specialist work often. And there is a little bit of a bias against early career researchers that I think maybe we need to get over. We tend to, with our book reviews, we tend to really look for researchers who have a record of publishing themselves. But there are very specialist topics, and sometimes those are emerging topics where the early career researcher is the only person, almost the only person who has that information. But making sure that we can find you is really important.
Thanks, Charles. And there's also been some really good suggestions in the chat as well. So definitely check out the answers that our audience has provided. This next question, Kathleen, I see you're interested in answering it, is, can the anonymity of peer reviewers sometimes hinder the effectiveness of the peer review process? And if so, would introducing open peer review, where authors and reviewers know each other's identities, improve the quality and transparency of the process?
So this has been a hobby horse of mine for a long time. I firmly believe that open peer review, in the sense that's being described here, in the communal sense of authors and reviewers knowing one another's identities and being able to be in conversation, would be a great boon for peer review, particularly for the author, in knowing how to interpret the comments that they're receiving. I mean, I have been as everyone who's listening, I'm quite sure, has been the recipient of that reviewer 2 review, where you just don't know how to take this. I mean, is this person such a leader in the field that really I should be paying attention to this? Or are they being cranky about something that they really shouldn't be cranky about? And having that kind of openness would help me as an author know more about and be able to ask questions of the reviewers to find out more about how to understand the comments that I'm receiving. Now, anonymity surfaced in peer review for some very good reasons, right? And by this, I mean double anonymous reviews, where not only are the reviewers anonymous in the comments that they make, but the authors are anonymous in kind of who it is that wrote that manuscript. And that end of anonymity surfaced at a point when it was very clear that biases in reviewers were preventing the work of early career researchers, of women, of people of color from surfacing in publications. So breaking that down through double anonymous review ostensibly helps everybody focus on the work, right? But in fact, I'm not convinced that that's the best way to get people to focus on the work. I think having more open and honest conversations in which all of the politics that we bring to the process of reading one another's work are something that we're forced to reckon with rather than kind of being able to hide them is really necessary. Because even in double anonymous review, some fields are so small that it's perfectly apparent who the author is, who the reviewers are. And also bias creeps in other kinds of ways, right? I can critique your method if I feel like your method is one that is not as good as my method is, right? And so I think that anonymity is not the cure-all that we have hoped that it would be. And I think in some ways it really does throw barriers into the process that would be more usefully removed if we were able to have conversations with one another.
That's interesting. I never thought of that, but you're right. I mean, the nature of academic research is that you're very, very, very specific because you're doing something new that nobody else has done. So therefore, you know the other 10 people that are kind of somewhat related, right? You can name them, you know, on your hand. So that's an interesting thought. Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah.
Still have about 6 minutes for questions. There's a lot here in the chat. There is one that I think is somewhat related to the answer that Kathleen just provided, not necessarily about anonymity, but if partiality is suspected during the review process, are there ways that a reviewer can show their responsibility toward the bias committed by them? Anyone have thoughts on that?
I think there's a few toolkits and guidelines that we can share that kind of guide. Am I right? Similar to the toolkit you were speaking about, Jocelyn, earlier. I don't know. I don't know if it's any proactive method, but yeah, go ahead. So, yeah.
Well, I was thinking that there is in the resource section, I put the best practices for peer review from the Association of University Presses, which was recently updated. And I think that there's a section on conflict of interest that would prevent someone from acting as a peer reviewer. That doesn't exactly get to the question, but I think it indicates, and it says, you know, there are myriad gray areas that may require further discussion. I think it indicates that this is very much on a case-by-case basis. I mean, just in general, I think one of the expectations that we have as publishers from peer reviewers is that they will be transparent. So if usually that would be transparent about something very, very specific, like a conflict, like working in the same department as somebody. But I think that's a space where one can acknowledge one's bias. And publishers will be very grateful for that level of self-reflection.
yeah, that's Kirsten Buchanan mentioned COPE. That's a good resource as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Charles. Another question. We've got a lot of context and then the question. So for our panelists, if you're looking in the Q&A, it's the question from Daniela. Essentially, the question is, what signals of trust should a truly equitable and transparent system pursue to engage all experts, including those who have been traditionally told they don't have a place in peer review?
So one thought on this, when we started building the Pilcrow tool, it was for use in particular by the Public Philosophy Journal, which is edited by Chris Long, now my former dean, alas, here at Michigan State. He's now provost at University of Oregon. The Public Philosophy Journal is really aimed at both scholars who are doing the work of philosophy in public, but also members of the public who are also doing the work of philosophy. And right, so it's intended to have this much more open community of folks who are working together across the walls of the ivory tower. And so this tool, in attempting to bring folks together in community around peer review, is very much intended to have people with different kinds of experience and different kinds of knowledge bases able to come together in conversation around the work that's being published.
I find the other question below that interesting as well. How does an editor ensure the peer review submitted is up to the mark? And are there any points to take care of as a peer reviewer initially? I mean, being able to get a sense of the trustworthiness of a peer reviewer who is not just qualified by their list of credentials comes a lot from some of the sort of the signals that are communicated in a peer review that's submitted. One of those is this whole point about trying to build up rather than rip down the work itself. Other signals are not just spending a lot of time nitpicking at small grammatical or spelling errors. That's always a sort of a no. That's something that is a warning sign a little bit, and too many peer reviewers do, in fact. So, I mean, there are some signals within the peer review itself that this is somebody who is trustworthy, is experienced, is a person who would be a good partner. But I do think that the questioner is right, that credentials are too often relied on, and affiliations. And that's why I really love that experiment with the Public Philosophy Journal, because we know as publishers that there's huge expertise out there in the community that may not well be recognized in the credentialing that people have, especially in a world where precarity is the norm, and many scholars of excellence are not closely affiliated with a particular institution anymore.
Thank you, Charles. We've come to the end of our time, and I'm just dropping a few more links in the chat to encourage people to catch up with us at future events or check out any of our events from the last few years. In fact, if you go back, we did have a webinar back in 2022 with Kathleen where we talked about Orchid in the Humanities, so definitely check that out. I do want to take this time now to thank all of our panelists for joining us. This was a wonderful conversation, and definitely thank you to our audience for contributing to the conversation. This session has been recorded, and the recording will be shared along with all these wonderful links that everybody shared. I've captured them all. Brian, any final words?
No, profound thanks. Really nice to spend the hour with you all and to think about these things, and enjoy the rest of your week, and good luck reviewing and writing, authors. So yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Peer Review Week.
Happy Peer Review Week.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.